1, and we are recording episode 655 with Ms. Clare Lopez, the first Clare Lopez episode of 2022. We were just talking about the episode I did yesterday with Dr. Matthias Desmet, Dr. Robert Malone, and Dr. Peter McCullough, and I was saving this for when we started recording. That was indirectly thanks to you. I had just finished the Malone episode. I was visiting my brother. I was in a hotel in Austin, and I was just kind of laying there scrolling through Twitter, which I never do. I never keep any social media apps on my phone. I delete them every day, and then I download them to post the podcast and delete them again for my own mental health. But I was just kind of scrolling through, breaking my own rules, and I had seen the hashtag mass formation psychosis, which was on all the platforms, and I saw a tweet from none other than the great Clare Lopez. And you said you had responded to someone, and you were like, "Why don't you give the guy credit?" Or something along the lines of like, call him by his name. It was just sort of like a by the way,
right.
yeah.
I know what it was. It had to do with Dr. Robert Malone's interview recently, within the past about a week, I think, with Joe Rogan on his podcast. It was more than 3 hours. It was a long interview and worth every single minute of it, worth its weight in gold. And they used the term on that show, Robert Malone did, mass formation psychosis. Apparently, Matthias Desmet prefers to just call it mass formation. And he explained in your show that he doesn't want to get into using sort of medical terminology that psychosis would, bring up. But in any case, so somehow, because Dr. Robert Malone has been deplatformed, has been suspended, banned from Twitter after that Joe Rogan show.
He was banned before the Rogan
before
show.
Before it even. Okay, he's banned. He's off. And people were trying to look it up. And so I tweeted and I said, well, just look up Matthias Desmet, because he's the one that kind of originated the term mass formation. Although I find now that it even goes back farther than him, but he's the one, let's say, that popularized it.
Sure.
And so that's what you were looking at on your tweet feed.
So I saw that, and I'm not gonna lie, I thought Matthias. So I got the name, and I was like, oh, cool. So I just Googled it to look up more. I thought it was like a Sigmund Freud guy. Like, I thought he'd been dead for like a century. I just thought this was this old thing. So I just Googled it, and I was like, Matthias Desmet, and it was like full professor at University of Ghent. And I was like, huh? And like the wheel started turning, and I like went to the website, and like, sure enough, there was his like contact email. And I was like, no way. And so like I sent him an email, and I was like, I'm sure this guy's getting contacted by everyone. And he emailed me back in like 5 minutes. And I was like,
Wow.
Yeah, I'd love for you to come on. And then I was like, what if I could maybe get Malone or McCullough? Like, I can't guarantee anything, but I was like, I've had him on before. Would you want to talk to them? And he was like, oh, sure, I'd be honored. And this thing started to kind of fall in place. And I didn't get in touch with Malone until like 45 minutes before the podcast. And he was like, yeah, I'll do it. And so this whole thing kind of culminated and came through. But no, I was telling my friend David that last night. I was like, no, it's actually responsible to the great Clare Lopez that you had tweeted the name. And I looked up the name. That's what led to yesterday's podcast. So I do have to give you credit in the fine print.
Absolutely. And as I was telling you before we came on air here today, I have just begun watching that podcast that you did yesterday. And I've got about halfway to go. I made it around halfway through before our time began here. But I'm really looking forward to finishing it. And it is a terrific interview for anybody who's not seen it yet. Go look this thing up. It is the three of them. Well, four with you, Tommy, but the three, Matthias Desmet and Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. Peter McCullough. Fabulous interview from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, they really were incredible together. It was insane. I can't believe it happened. But so with that, and as you asked, what are we going to talk about? And as my answer always is I have no idea. So what are the kind of the biggest things going on right now? Is it still Ukraine? Is it what is it? What do you think is the sort of the biggest thing kind of moving around right now?
I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. at the beginning of the new year, after people have taken breaks off or maybe even, a couple of weeks of the holidays, everybody's all back at it again, right? And so obviously, with tomorrow being January the 6th,
Oh, yeah.
the 1 year anniversary of the rowdy conduct at the Capitol building 1 year ago, there's that, and hearings going on up on Capitol Hill. And of course, Russia still maintains tens of thousands of troops on the Ukraine border. I think we talked about that, you and I, the last time we were together back in December. And then, of course, the entire SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, and now the emergence of this new variant called Omicron, according to the Greek alphabet. And thankfully, it looks that this strain is way more contagious than anything that's preceded it, but also a whole lot less deadly, less lethality in terms of deaths, or even in terms of hospitalizations. Much less severe with symptoms. Many people barely notice anything at all. Others may notice something that feels like a cold, the sniffles, some body aches, perhaps, that sort of thing. So, grab bag, take your pick, but all that's going on.
Do you think, and this is kind of, I guess, outside of the grab bag, because I was walking through the airport the other day and, saw on the news, and I think it was a statement from Biden saying, like the U.S. will respond with force if Russia advances further into Ukraine. Do you think that and again, this is all wild speculation, not that you have the answer, is the response to Ukraine also it's kind of like that sort of running theory some people have, that one of the reasons we dropped the A-bomb was it wasn't just for Japan, it was so the Soviet Union saw what we had. Do you think that a heavy U.S. military response in defense of Ukraine is also sort of a practicing what we preach, knowing that really we have this oddly kind of identical thing right next door, where it's China and Taiwan? Is our defense of Ukraine sort of like hey, China, like, check it out? Do you think that will be what it is?
I think that an outright U.S. military response should be taken completely off the table.
Okay.
I think that would be exactly the wrong course of action. I've been doing a lot of research on the Ukraine-Russia situation, just for other interviews and such. But I'll tell you a couple of places that really influenced me. One was an interview with a Russian by the name of Andrei Ilarionov. Ilarionov formerly was a very close aide to Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. But back around 2006, he broke away from Putin. Don't know exactly the circumstances, but came to the United States, became a fellow at the Cato Institute for a long time, just until the end of last year, 2021. And now he's a fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Well, watching an interview that he did recently with Robert Riley at the Westminster Institute, and this is, I think it's on YouTube online, really excellent, long form interview. Ilarionov makes the point that, of course, he knows Putin very well. And he believes that Putin is trying to achieve, through information operations, in other words, threatening, a mass buildup of Russian troops on the Ukraine border, troops and tanks and artillery and what have you, threatening visibly, using media, including social media, propaganda, etc., that Putin is seeking to gain concessions short of outright military invasion of Ukraine proper by Russian troops, to obtain that which he cannot obtain, or has not been able to attain so far in discussions, nor, per Ilarionov, nor would he be able to actually succeed with an all-out invasion of Ukraine. Not only would the entire Ukrainian army, rise up to fight tooth and nail to oppose, to counter a Russian invasion of their country, but you would see guerrilla units,
Yeah.
informal military militias all over the country. Russia would not win. Russia would not be able to do that. It cannot bite off all of Ukraine through military, sheer raw power military force and succeed, is his point, Ilarionov's point. The other points that he made were that Russia right now is economically very weak. It's not in a strong position economically speaking. Also not in a strong position speaking demographically. Now that's longer term, that's not quite immediate, but the Russian birth rate is in a demographic death spiral, numbering about 1.3 or something, maybe 4, 5 children per woman per lifetime, when of course 2.1 is replacement level. So there's that. And the other place that I took I did a lot of research with and took a lot of points from is the Institute for the Study of War. Excellent outfit, excellent set of experts on war in general, as a discipline, as a study of a discipline, but also then of specific places, hotspots, if you will, around the world, and of course now, Ukraine and Russia. And their analysis at ISW was very similar to that of Andrei Ilarionov, and that being that Putin cannot afford in different ways, economically, militarily, diplomatically, to be seen to attempt an all-out invasion. And we're not talking about just those eastern regions, sometimes called the Donbass region of Donetsk and Luhansk. Not just talking about those which already have separatists all over, but meaning an all-out invasion of, Ukraine proper, the rest of the, which is huge, rest of the country, and targeting major cities, Dnepropetrovsk, Kiev, and so forth, that he would not be able to do that successfully. And then not only would he be losing militarily, Putin, losing militarily, but then he would have given up any hope of achieving his objectives through other means, like I've mentioned, diplomatic, information operations, and so forth. But seeing weakness in Washington, D.C. and the White House and the entire Biden administration really has, many of us think, emboldened Putin. Now, Putin had private phone conversations, I guess video phone conversations with President Biden on both December 7th and December 30th, just a few days ago. And the threats that President Biden made were along the lines of, if you step 1 foot further, we're going to enforce more sanctions. They're going to be really, really, really hard sanctions. Does Putin take that seriously or not? Open to question. But just the last couple of points. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. It wants to be. And this is one of Russia's red lines, that neither Ukraine or any more of those former, behind the Iron Curtain Eastern European countries, that none of them anymore that already are, join NATO. Obviously, places like Romania and Bulgaria already have, but no more, and certainly not Ukraine. Putin has set forth a number of demands, among them that, but then also that, that the West refrain, NATO refrain, US refrain from positioning heavy weapons, or providing heavy weapons to Ukraine, to include things like anti-tank missiles, for example. There was an agreement, actually it was a couple of agreements kind of rolled into one, called the Minsk agreements. And that was 2014-15. The 2015 one is the, the final one. And in that agreement, which was signed in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, the Russians set forth a number of conditions, those I just mentioned. They were also going to do things like a prisoner exchange, obviously a ceasefire, which it practically immediately fell apart, and also to involve the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in multi-party talks to relieve tensions, et cetera, and to have OSCE monitors on the ground inside of Ukraine and in the eastern regions, the Donbass, the Donetsk and Luhansk parts of Ukraine. A lot of that fell very quickly by the wayside, but in any case, those two sources, Andrei Ilarionov and then the people at the Institute for the Study of War, really influenced my thinking on this, and that's kind of what they said.
To go back to what you were saying at the beginning, what is it exactly that Russia is doing different, and why are they doing it? Is it, I get what you're saying, you can't invade, it's going to be guerrilla, as Russia saw in Afghanistan in the 70s, as we just saw for 20 years in the Middle East and Vietnam. You can't win, in no meaningful sense can you win guerrilla warfare. You'd have to use thermonuclear, and then the whole, what do you gain? So I get that. And I also get the sort of, you also don't want to go for it if you don't think you can get it, because nothing makes you look weaker than that. What is it exactly that they are doing differently? Is it just it's using every other avenue to and how is that different than, isn't that kind of the norm now anyway? Isn't that what China's doing to us? Aren't we doing that?
Yeah. So what Putin is doing, and he's way more sophisticated and better at it, the Russians are collectively, than the United States or the West, is this area of information warfare and hybrid warfare too, if you want to include that. But in terms of information warfare, what he seeks to gain by what some would paint as posturing are concessions to do with lifting of sanctions that already are imposed against Russia. A pledge, as I've mentioned, not to ever allow Ukraine to become a member of NATO. I mean, NATO's not buying that, but one solution could be, well, it's going to take a long time before any kind of discussions could ever be held, and kind of give Russia a face-saving way out without committing to never allow it. I mean, what's it, to allow Ukraine ever to become a member of NATO, which it wants to, but NATO very likely will not allow that. To gain that kind of a concession out of NATO, a flat statement, which will not be forthcoming, but there could be some kind of a middle ground there. And then, of course, we haven't mentioned, but the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, right? So for a very long time under the Trump administration here in the US, United States government policy was to oppose the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which as it is now built, and it is completed under the Biden administration, which removed sanctions against that completion, the route of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline bypasses Ukraine. Formerly, there had been a proposed route that would have gone through Ukraine and from there on to Germany and Western Europe. And, which I think we've mentioned this previously, but sort of geographically speaking, it makes sense that oil and gas rich Russia would provide energy needs to Europe, Eastern and Western. But given the leverage that arrangement provides to Moscow, there's serious hesitation about it. And that's why the Trump administration worked so hard when, by the way, Rick Grenell was ambassador to Germany. And for a long time, they held onto those sanctions against the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Well, it is now completed, and the route takes it actually around Ukraine. And I'm looking at a little map I've got here for myself on some notes that I made. Where did I put it? Must be in this one. There it is. Yeah. So the route runs from Western Russia underwater, actually, through the North Sea, past the Baltic Sea. Maybe I should say the Baltic Sea, but past the Scandinavian countries, then arching downwards to connect finally to northern Germany. And that's where the end point now is, and for distribution from there on. And so, of course, some of the things that Putin and Russia wanted from talks with the United States would be what we've already granted, which is a lifting of sanctions against the completion of this pipeline. Now, here's the thing. In Germany, there's a long process before the pipeline can actually be, what would you say, approved and opened for business. It's built, it's completed in that sense, but there's a lot of sort of red tape, I guess you might say, in Germany, which now has a new chancellor, by the way, Olaf Scholz, to actually make it operational, right? So they're saying that the Germans are saying this will not happen in the first half of this year, 2022. It's just not going to happen. And so Putin is, of course, wanting to pressure that to go faster. He wants it open, naturally. He wants that leverage that this will afford him against Western Europe, Germany, and the others. Cutting Ukraine out of it, is an objective he's already achieved. Inserting himself, Putin, into these discussions in the first place is an achievement of information operations. So all of these things are part of his sort of toolbox that he's using right now. And then, of course, the visible pressure of those tens of thousands, not quite sure how many. I've heard the Ukrainians say 94,000. Other sources say up to 175,000, but maybe he's withdrawn 10,000 of those recently. Not quite sure, but it's tens of thousands, plus tanks and artillery and other military equipment on the border with Ukraine. So all of that taken together is how Putin is trying to shape the narrative, shape the discussions, and shape things to his benefit. What does he want? He wants to reestablish the influence and power of Russia over its, I guess you'd call it near abroad, over those independent countries now that used to be behind the Iron Curtain under Russia's thumb, under Moscow's thumb. He knows that he cannot reconstruct the Soviet Union. That won't happen. But if he can peel off one and another, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, to bring those governments under Russian pressure so much that they exceed essentially to Russian demands on any number of things, that's what he wants to do. And at the same time, and necessary to achieve that objective is, of course, to keep NATO and the West from, as he would call it or think of it, encroaching any further eastward towards the boundaries, the borders with Russia.
Why would that was brilliant. Why would the United States put sanctions against the oil pipe? Is that just kind of every nation goes at each other in any way you can? You try to get your own little win?
It's because certainly in the Trump administration and with the superb Rick Grenell as ambassador to Germany, it was understood that the completion of that pipeline on that route around and bypassing Ukraine would very firmly put the consumers in Western Europe under potential threat.
Gotcha.
From Russia. and that any time in the midst of brutally cold winter months,
Turn it off.
they can turn the taps off or down or whatever, right? That's why, because we recognize, the United States government under the Trump administration recognized the leverage that pipeline is intended, I mean, from the get-go, intended to put up against Western Europe, our NATO allies.
Yeah. I mean, you're a heroin dealer, right? Yeah, you're trying to suck them in. It's kind of ironic that we set out the importance of that and the danger of being dependent on a potentially enemy nation, and now we're not energy independent at all, and we are. It's some irony in there. So could it be that all of this posturing, it kind of seems like it might just settle into posturing in perpetuity, because the US, we don't want to use military. Russia, clearly, as you were saying, they don't want to. And not only that, if there is no military action, then we're not going to see any reason to have Ukraine join NATO. I think we talked about that last time. Like, could this, for Ukraine's own benefit, they're looking out for themselves. They might be going, hey, we have to join you. It's kind of except for the Ukraine, but it's kind of like a win-win-win. We don't want to use force. Russia doesn't want to use force. And then that way we won't have to let Ukraine into NATO. And that way Russia won't have their red line crossed.
It could be a way out, a kind of a face-saving way out for all of the above.
It's a stalemate where we're all
it's not ideal,
but
it's better than a hot war invasion by tens of thousands of Russian troops.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like if that happened in my armchair general, right, all my military education, my non-existent West Point education, but I feel like the iron's hot, that's when China would move to Taiwan. Or is the US, do we truly have a big enough force projection that we could still defend Taiwan? Or is that waning?
Here's another place, the Republic of China, Taiwan, where neither the United States nor any of our allies in that region of East Asia, India, Japan, Australia, naming them because we and they are all members of the Quad, we don't have a defense treaty with Taiwan, with Taipei. We have different documents that make a commitment of the United States to an independent government, a free and democratic style government in Taiwan. But we don't have a formal treaty obligation. So what we've done instead, we, the United States, we know now from media reporting that the United States has US military there in Taiwan training Taiwanese military. We have sold Taiwan a range of defensive weaponry. And very recently, really over the last, I guess, several months, we've heard a number of statements from the top levels of the Japanese government, including their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the effect that were Beijing to launch an all-out military assault attack against Taiwan, that Japan ought to and would consider it in their national security interest to intervene and try to help defend Taiwan. So bottom line, I think, for all of this is that we there in East Asia also want a firm deterrence policy to avoid a hot war invasion. But it's treading a bit of a fine line. The United States government is not going to recognize the Taiwanese government as independent of China and an independent nation in its own right. One China, how does that go? One China, two governments? One China, to something. But if that can be extended, while putting up enough of a deterrence against China, that's probably what the policy should be. That's probably what we're aiming for. And here again, you've got a situation where the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, probably does not have the military or economic wherewithal to just swallow Taiwan and just take it over. Yes, they could launch a very serious offensive against the island or against some of its outlying islands. There are many small islands in and around the area. And here's where Japan comes in, because some of those nearby islands are claimed by Japan. But so they could launch against all of that, any of that, part of that. But the resistance or that they would meet, we want to make it obvious. We want to make it clear that the resistance that the CCP would meet would be overwhelming, and maybe just not worth it, not worth the effort. But again, to sort of perpetuate this status quo that doesn't recognize Taiwan as an independent country, but yet it has an independent government system, independent of Beijing. Well, sort of. So that's, that's probably where we are. China, of course, has all kinds of internal tumult going on right now within the Chinese Communist Party, its economy, and so forth. Demographics, we could talk about that as well. We talked about the demographics in Russia. Well, you think that's bad? The Chinese population could be drastically reduced. I've heard estimates as much as halved by 2065, 2070. And again, that goes back to the CCP's own policy of decades, couple decades anyway, or more, of the one-child policy, which left literally tens of millions of young men, young Chinese men, who will never have a girlfriend, much less a wife or a family. It's a very bad situation. They call them bare branches because they'll never have children. And other things, just make a mess out of it, including human trafficking of women into the country. They've made a mess for themselves, but it's their own doing. And that's why the population will crash in the very near future. I mean, within decades, not right now, not immediately, and there could be a lot of trouble between now and then, but it is crashing. So for all of those reasons, we need to make it clear that it's not in the CCP's best interest, nor Xi Jinping's himself either, individually as the chairman of the party, the leader of the country, to take this on and perhaps run into a debacle. That would really be bad for him personally, the Chinese Communist Party, the Central Committee, and so forth. And we need to make that so obviously bad as an alternative that the status quo is kind of maintained.
It's kind of just like the Cold War repeat. I mean, if, we now know, we can look back and look at how the Cold War ended now that it's, sufficiently far enough in the rearview mirror. But I mean, I can only imagine at the time, let's say if this was just 50 years ago, I'd probably be sitting here and saying, like, we can't just keep kicking the can down the road. Korea, Vietnam, we're just posturing, Cuban Missile Crisis. But eventually that is what worked, was you just kept kicking the can down the road, kept the fists up until finally one of them collapsed.
Well, I mean, there was more to it than that, although that was part of it, yeah. But when Ronald Reagan came along, as U.S. president in 1980 until 88, two-term president, he made it his number one mission to collapse the Soviet Union. And he did this in terms of military technology buildup that the Russians could not match. He did it in terms of economics because he knew that internally the Russian economy could not match the dynamism of the American economy.
Free market.
And then of course, third was the war in Afghanistan, where we, for better or for worse, stepped in and supported the Mujahideen, who are now the Taliban. But in any case, I guess the point is that things don't stay the same. They don't remain static. And if you can affect the direction some things go, whether it be diplomatically, economically, financially, militarily, technology, if you can affect those things while maintaining this sort of status quo, over time, the accumulation of those changes can build in the direction that we're trying to go.
I think that's which is such a BS out on my part. Like, oh no, that's what I meant to say. But I think that's what I meant to say is like the big picture is fists are up and we're kind of in lock, and then but then you can kind of go do stuff on the sides and try to dissolve it from within. Now, are we going to be able to do that? I mean, it all comes down to which way does that go now? Do we lock in with China right now? Do we lock in? If China is still rising, are they going to bide their time, or are they a paper tiger, and do we have to bide our time, and in maybe 10, 20, 30 years, it's just a repeat of Reagan? Do we have some guy come along, spend him into the dirt, and plow China down?
Well, very good points. And here I'm going to cite a good friend and someone whose brilliance and analysis and knowledge of these affairs I rely on a lot, and that is David Goldman. David Goldman, senior editor at Asia Times, for many, many years, published columns there under the pseudonym Spengler, taking off from the philosopher Oswaldo Spengler. Still writes under that pseudonym, but is now out, if you will, as David Goldman, who is primarily a banking and finance expert, but also brilliant on things like demographics of China, and many other things. And his main point, and he wrote a book that I would recommend to people from, I think it was 2019, it probably came out, and it was called "You Will Be Assimilated," taking off from Star Trek, right? The Borg, resistance is futile, you will be assimilated. And that's the title of his book, You Will Be Assimilated, and he's talking about China. So in the interim, just as you say, Tommy, in the meantime here, we do have a very serious challenge on our hands. And it has to do with China's all-out drive for advanced technology in areas like semiconductor chips, the technologies, plural, that go into 5G, artificial intelligence, robotics, any number of things, hypersonic technology, hologram technology. I could go on and on, quantum computing, all of these things. And they're graduating. This is David's point. They're graduating, I don't know what it is, 10 million engineers per year out of Chinese universities. And we're graduating a bunch of, gender studies and what have you, with buns in their hair. This is just, this isn't going to work. In the interim, if you think of this, as a window, as you've just put it rightly, if you think about this as a window that kind of closing, maybe for them and for us, we need to get on the ball here and take our educational system seriously, and really ramp up in STEM subjects from grade school on up through high school, undergrad, graduate, etc., science, technology, engineering, and math, of course. And, get rid of this critical race theory, ethnic studies crap, which is polluting the minds of generations of children. Never mind that they've been kept out of school for the last couple of years. China didn't do that. China doesn't do any of that. The kids are in school every day, a whole lot more hours than our kids are. And they're not studying underwater basket weaving. They are graduating engineers. So that's David Goldman's point, and I would reiterate it. We have got to get serious about catching up on certain technological areas that we have let slip.
Maybe our greatest export could be, maybe we start exporting critical race theory to China. Maybe we start
Well, where do you think
exporting.
it came from in the
I
first
know,
place?
I know.
You know,
Maybe I think maybe we need to start
send
exporting.
it back,
Yeah,
get wrapped.
basket. Yeah, I think we need to start exporting basket weaving. I think we need to start exporting our culture. Start, getting them to dye
Well,
their
you know
hair
what?
pink and
That
blue.
I know you've got a certain time limit today, but that's a topic for a whole nother podcast, maybe. And that is that how, after the death of Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai in 1976, they both died that year, and the rise over the next 2-3 years of Deng Xiaoping, who ushered in revisions to Communist Party policy that incorporated and even welcomed certain elements of capitalism in order to revive the Chinese economy and society after 10 years of devastation under the Cultural Revolution. That capitalism took hold. And in a lawless society like China's, corruption followed massively. And there is an elite class within the upper ranks of the Chinese Communist Party, China, that has gotten used to being rich, doing whatever they want, flouting the laws such as they be, flouting the rule of the Chinese Communist Party whenever it suits them. And so even regular, ordinary people, Chinese, have looked now more and more to a capitalist system as a way to advance their own lives, to get ahead as ordinary people. And of course, now Xi Jinping is alarmed. I guess some other members of the Central Committee probably are too, with how the, I guess as they would look at it, well, maybe we should too, the moral drawbacks of unfettered capitalism are corroding not just the communist ideal in China, but the society as a whole. And that's to be encouraged, in my mind, from our point of view. And we can talk about that some more another time.
That will definitely be the next episode, because unfortunately I do got to wrap this one up. But that's a beautiful cliffhanger. That's what we'll pick up next Thursday. The great Clare Lopez. I'll put all the links to all of your writings, your Twitters, all that good stuff. I will put it in the description. As always, go follow Clare, follow her readings, go read her writings. I'm having a stroke apparently. And thank you so much, Miss Lopez.
Thank you, Tommy. It's great to see you again. Happy
Thank
New
you.
Year, everybody.
Thank you very much. God bless everyone. Stay safe.